Hello, welcome to Sky Sweaty Record Review, episode 182, the only first listen new music review show hosted by a professor immediately after leaving the gym. Now, of course, I'm not just out of the gym. I'm actually in my office. The day is about to start. I actually have to write a proposal for a conference, but instead of doing that, I'm going to be reviewing the new Beatles album, Abbey Road. So sometimes I drive into work and I listen to new music then, and I just can't hold myself back. I just have to talk about it. I have to talk about this new remix, remaster, whatever it is that Giles Martin, the son of the original producer of the Beatles albums, did with the album Abbey Road. I am, after all, a professor. A little Beatles joke. Maybe I'll put him up there, see if he stays there. Jeremy, Hillary. Hey, he stayed up there. Okay, so last year, around Thanksgiving, I drove down to Boston, and I drove with my two children, my father, and my future wife. And at that time, this new remaster, the Giles Martin version of the White Album came out. And I bought it and listened to it. And while I was listening, like the whole time I was like freaking out. I was like, I can't handle it. Like, I don't know if I love it. I don't know if I hate it. It's just so, like the experience was so intense for me. And as I was driving, I looked next to me and my then girlfriend, future wife, was just like, mm-hmm. And, you know, my kids were like, yeah, we've heard this album before. and my dad was like, yeah, it's the Beatles. And I was trying to figure out, like, why was I having this really deep experience? And they weren't. And, I mean, obviously, my kids, they've heard the White Album a couple times, but they didn't have that strong connection to it. And same thing, you know, my father was alive when it came out, obviously, and I'm sure he listened to it many times, but I don't think he had that kind of really deep listening experience of just listening to it over and over and over and over again. And same thing with my future wife. You know, she'd heard it, she likes the Beatles, but it wasn't this kind of thing where she had memorized and known every single snare hit, every single bit of that album, back and front, like it was a part of her fabric. And so what I did was I was like, all right, I'm going to explain to you why this is so different to me. And in sort of an uncharacteristic turn of things, I didn't have anything really to say. I was just like, it's just different, okay? It's just really different. And I would play the old version and the new version, and it didn't sound that different. And so what I set out to do was just create a whole set of metaphors and similes that could describe how this is different, how it feels to someone like me, and probably most of my listeners or watchers, this insane feeling. Because this feeling was repeated exactly on Abbey Road. They did the same thing. You can look up online or exactly what Giles Martin did. I believe he found like the actual takes and was able to remaster them and re-edit them in a way that was much more faithful to the original sound, a lot less compromise than had to be made on the original mix, something like that. That ends up with the simplest way of describing it is just a much cleaner listening experience. But that's not really a fair enough description. So the first kind of way I would describe it as a professor is sort of like it has that feeling of the unheimlich, which Freud described, which is the uncanny, where it feels unhome-like, you know, like you're listening to something, you have listened to Abbey Road, who knows, 1,000 times, it's possible. And then all of a sudden, everything is just a little bit off. It's not off in a bad way. It's actually probably mostly a good way, but it's a little bit off. The first metaphor that came to mind was waking up in your room and having everything slightly moved, but like imperceptibly, like only some kind of, you know, you need like a ruler to figure out how it moved by millimeters, but everything in your room has moved, and it's slightly easier when you get up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, or it's slightly easier when you get out your socks from the sock drawer, like your elbow doesn't quite hit the side of the wall like it used to. You couldn't tell the difference. Even if you showed picture to picture, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. But in aggregate, you feel like you're in a totally different room. Or like a shirt that gets lightly bleached, just lightly. But then, part of this whole issue is we're in this day of remastering and re-editing and polishing. And the question is like, what's lost? And I think the better metaphor that I could come up with, a better simile, is HD, right? So, HD, they're going through and they're taking all of the great classics of cinema and television and they're sprucing them up. And they're making them look shiny and new. But the problem is that, they were recorded on old technology, so it doesn't always work. And people's faces weren't ready for HD back in the old days. Like giant close-ups of people doesn't quite work. But I think the Beatles, their albums are so good, are so perfect, that it takes to this shining, this kind of cleaning. And for that, I would compare it to like if you could come out with a super HD version of Contempt with Brigitte Bardot. I imagine if you had a HD version of Marilyn Monroe or something, you'd see imperfections in the skin or something. But like Brigitte Bardot or Paul Newman, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. Like the two sexiest performances in movie history, in my take. I think if you took Paul Newman, A Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, and you perfected it and made it color and made it as HD as possible, the expressiveness and the beauty would not be compromised at all. So that's kind of what these things are like. It's like, in theory, I don't want everything to be shined up and perfected. But if the thing itself is perfect, it's actually not hurt. Okay, enough creepy comments about old, dead, and almost dead actors and actresses. Because the fear is that things happen like, like the Sistine Chapel. So they redid the Sistine Chapel by Michelangelo, and it used to have this really cool sort of like otherworldly, hazy, centuries of candlelight glow over it. And then they redid it, and I don't like it as much. It looks kind of cartoony now. Or sculptures in medieval cathedrals. A lot of people think of medieval cathedrals as being completely gray and dark and black and gray and white and gray and gray and gray. But in reality, they were all painted, and we know that now. So, like, what if we went back to all the great cathedrals and painted everybody? I don't know. It would be too different. It would mess up our sense of aesthetic. Like, there's something about the beauty of the graininess of old movies. Or there's something about the beauty of the dullness of a cathedral that would somehow be lost. But that doesn't happen with these albums. And that's what I'm trying to describe. Listening to Abbey Road, the new version, is like listening to a completely new record that I know completely well. And it is neither worse nor inherently better, but it's different, and therefore it makes me happy to listen to. Someday, they're going to release a version of Star Wars that is the version that most fans want. In 1997, George Lucas released a cleaned up version where a lot of the weird sort of mistakes of special effects in the 70s were cleaned up. But at the same time, he put in a bunch of extraneous junk that nobody wanted, like weird little aliens and an extra scene that was badly done. And George Lucas is like, I'm just going to give you that. And people have been crying, please, just give us a cleaned up version of the original movie. Just make it as good as you possibly can. HD, 4K, 9K, 10K. But just give us the original. And he won't do it. In a way, that's what these Beatles albums are doing. They're giving us these ridiculously cleaned up, perfected versions of perfect things. Except I don't think any of us knew that this was out there. I mean, can this be done for Pet Sounds? Is it possible to do this? To Giles Martin it up? I don't know. So those are some of my metaphors. In general, and more specific, it's worth listening to in specific ways. Like, a lot of the weird sounds just seem to come out a lot more. It's a little bit intrusive, but interesting. Like, there's a sound in Come Together that I don't think I'd ever heard before, but has been in all the versions. The organ on, the Sun King is super clear. Like, the fuzz bass on Mr. Mustard, it's fuzzier, but it's clear. And, the distortion somehow, the distortion on I Want You, She's So Heavy, is crisper, but it's not less distorted. This is one of the most damned weird things you can possibly listen to. It really is. Like, my suggestion is listen to a different version of Abbey Road for 10 years nonstop, and then listen to this, and you'll see what I mean. It's a delightfully bizarre experience to have this clarity. It's like you're eating a stew, but you can taste each individual item in a different place on your tongue, as opposed to all going together. It's like it all separates into little pieces on your tongue. Yeah, okay, that's a weird metaphor and simile. Here Comes the Sun is the big outlier. It's totally different. I mean, this mix is, I don't know, if maybe it's because it's like their most popular song now. I can't quite figure out why it is, but I mean, like, there's like this descending synthesizer sound that's in the original, but they turned it way up in the mix. And to me, that's a little bit of a bummer, because that, like, a descending synthesizer sound on a song about the sun coming out, it feels like the sun is setting. I don't know. It's one of the great examples of what makes this whole album just feel more modern, and I don't know what it is about this mix that just makes it feel more new. Like, it just feels like a new record. In general, it seems that the synthesizers are given more pride of place, and you kind of hear that throughout. Maybe that's part of the reason it sounds so new. It is kind of funny. I was driving to work, and a colleague who I really like, actually, I saw her, and she drove by me and kind of waved, and I started getting nervous because I was like, I knew my timing, and I knew I was going to be getting home. I was going to be arriving at the office right towards the end of the album. And so when you work in the same office and when you park in the same parking lot, obviously you get out and you talk to each other. But, like, I didn't want to do the whole blah blah thing. And, like, I actually, like, look forward to talking to this person generally. And so I'm, like, feeling all this anxiety as I pull up into my campus, and I end up, like, doing this weird loop around the ROTC building, and I'm just sitting there listening to Golden Slumbers and Carry That Weight and The End and Her Majesty, the whole thing. I'm just like, I can't have this interrupted. And I guess that's part of the conclusion, that Abbey Road is a good album. And I sort of want to say, first of all, I'll just show this off because it's kind of fun. My dad bought this in France in 1964, must have been. 65? Not really sure. Quatre garçons dans le vent. 4 boys in the wind. That's what they called Hard Day's Night. This is my conclusion. I've only felt this kind of unreal relationship to Abbey Road once in my life. You know, I've listened to this CD 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times. The only time I ever felt totally like this, like, oh my God, I know this record and I don't, it was the first time I heard it on vinyl. What? Right? The actual original version is as alien to me as this new version. I grew up in the digital age when they remastered everything. And I remember, you know, all the old people in my life saying, oh, they screwed up the Beatles and they took out the feeling and I like the crunch of the vinyl. And when I listen to the vinyl, the warmth or whatever, or the mix or whatever it was that they did, has that same unhome-like feeling, that uncanny, unheimlich feeling of it being the thing that I know but slightly different. Which is all a long way to say, thank goodness this exists. I want more of this. I want them to come out with remixes every 3 years, every 4 years. I don't care. You know, the Beatles sing a lot about money. Like, their best album, Revolver, starts off with a song about money. The famous Second Side of Abbey Road starts off with a song about money. And if they want money, as far as I'm concerned, they should get Danger Mouse to come in and remix Abbey Road. They should get DJ Khaled to come in and remix Abbey Road. Like, let's just keep doing it, because the music is so good. It can take all this kinds of manipulation and remastering and refining and just giving us an excuse to listen to it again. It's kind of like Star Wars, actually. I love it when they come out with new versions because I love the movies. I just like experiencing them. No matter how much they mess it up, I like experiencing them over and over again. Okay, so there's my brief thoughts. I better prepare that talk that I'm hopefully going to be giving in Boston on a French rap group, actually, and their use of samples. Wish me luck. All right, until next time, there's the camera. Oh, you know what? Why don't you tell him, Jeremy? There's the camera!